Hello and welcome. We will continue with the equity investment analysis. This topic, equity market equilibrium. In our today's lesson, we continue with the discussion of the equity market equilibrium models. The models. In our last lesson, we covered Greenwald-Kroner model. Today we will discuss the other two models, that is Tobin's Q model and Yardeni model. That's what we intend to study in our today's lesson. So, candidates, welcome. We first begin with the Tobin's Q model of equity market equilibrium. This model, candidates, was introduced by Nicholas Kaldor in 1966. Kaldor. It was introduced by Nicholas Kaldor or Kaldor. That was in 1966 through his paper Marginal Productivity and the Macroeconomic Theories of Distribution. It was later on popularized, that is a decade later, by James Tobin, and the year is Tobin in 1970. Now, Tobin described this model using two quantities. That is the market value of the firm, market value of the firm, and the replacement cost. So we have the numerator as the market value of the firm, the denominator, the replacement cost. That is the denominator, is the replacement cost, or the reproduction cost, or the market or the price in the market for newly produced commodities. So, candidates, the replacement cost is the price that an entity would pay to replace an existing asset at current market prices with a similar asset. Then the numerator, we have the market value of the firm, the market value of the firm, the going price in the market for exchanging existing assets. That is the market value of the firm. So, in other words, candidates, the Tobin's Q model is just a ratio of the real market value of physical capital goods, denoted as MV, all right, to the real reproduction or real replacement cost of those goods, denoted as R. That's being equal to, that is, in other words, being equal to the ratio of the nominal value of physical assets. So, Tobin's Q model is just a ratio of the market value of the firm and the replacement cost. That model is that simple. It is that simple. We'll now move to discuss the other model, Yardeni model. Yardeni model. Yardeni, this is number 3, Yardeni model. The Yardeni model was popularized by Edward Yardeni, and it is a valuation model that is used to determine whether the overall stock market is overvalued or not. This model, candidates, the Yardeni model can be stated as follows. Yardeni model is equal to this Yardeni model can be summarized in the following equation: E1 over P naught is equal to YB minus D times LTEG. This is the equation, candidates, where E1 over P naught is the earnings yield. The coefficient B measures the weight the market gives to a 5-year earnings projection. YB, candidates, is the A-rated corporate bond yield, which allows for risk to be incorporated into the model. D is the weighting factor, measuring the importance the market assigns to the earnings projections. And LTEG, simply stands for long-term earnings, L for long, T for term, E for earnings, and G, growth, long-term earnings growth. That is just the consensus 5-year earnings growth rate forecast for the market index, and it could be the S&P from the Thomson Financial. So this is the Yardeni model. It's equal to E1 over P naught, which is equal to YB minus D times LTEG. Is that clear, candidates? You need to have the formula in your head, especially for those preparing for exams. This is the Yardeni model. Yardeni model. Candidates, E1 over P naught is the earnings yield. The earnings yield. And in a short while, we will be carrying out some illustrations to help us calculate the earnings yield based on the Yardeni model. And before we do an illustration, candidates, we need to note that a justified forward earnings yield that is below, that is equal to, or greater than the forward earnings yield value implied by the current equity market index values, using the consensus forward earnings estimates, for example, would indicate that equities are either undervalued, fairly valued, or overvalued. Undervalued, fairly valued, or overvalued. That is the purpose for calculating the Yardeni model, is to find out whether the equities are undervalued, whether they are fairly valued or overvalued. So a justified forward earnings yield that is below, that is equal to or greater than the forward earnings yield that or the forward earnings yield value implied by the current equity market index value, and that can be done using the consensus forward earnings estimates. That would indicate that the equities are undervalued, fairly valued, or overvalued. We will now move to answer one or two questions. Yardeni model, question number 1. Illustration 1. Assume a corporate bond yield is 6.49% and the forecast for long-term earnings growth is 11.95%. Required, A, determine the Yardeni model estimate of the fair value earnings yield assuming D is 0.05 and D is 0.10. B, are equities overvalued or undervalued if the S&P 500 earnings yield is 5.5%? That's the question. A rated corporate bond. A corporate bond yield is 6.49%. So we'll first answer part A. Illustration 1A. We are to calculate the Yardeni model assuming D is 0.05. So we'll start with the assumption that D is 0.05. What will be the earnings yield using the Yardeni model? Earnings yield using the Yardeni model. That is the question. Then we will calculate the earnings yield when D is 0.1, okay, using Yardeni model. Yardeni model. Now, using Yardeni model, we know candidates that earnings yield, which is equal to E1 over P naught from this equation, YB minus D is equal to YD minus D times L tag. So candidates, that's the first step. When you have such a question, put down the formula. Put down the formula for earnings yield using Yardeni model. This is the formula. Then we check from the question. Do you have these inputs from the question? YB, we have it. YB, we have it. That is the corporate bond yield of 6.49%. 6.49%. 6.49% converted into decimal will be 0.0649. Then D, we have it here, candidates. We are calculating the earnings yield where D is 0.05. So we have minus 0.05. Then we have the LTEG from the question. The LTG from the question we see there is long-term earnings growth is 11.95 converted into decimal, that is 0.1195. That will give us the earnings yield according to Yardeni model. We have 0.0649 minus 0.05 times 0.1195. 1195. The answer here is 0.0589, which is approximately equal to 5.9%. 5.9%. 5.9%. That is part A of the question. We are to determine the Yardeni model estimate of the fair earnings yield assuming D is 0.05. The other part of the question, candidates were to do what? You are required to, the question is, are equities overvalued or undervalued? That is, if the S&P 500 earnings yield is 5.5%. The S&P 500 earnings yield is 5.5%. 5.5%. The Yardeni model's earnings yield is 5.9%. The question is, are the equities overvalued or undervalued? We know, candidates, 5.5% is less than 5.9%. The S&P 500 value is 5.5%. That's the market value, 5.5%. But the Yardeni's earnings yield is 5.9%. The question is, are the equities overvalued or undervalued? So, candidates, these equities are overvalued. The market says the equities are 5.5%. This one we've calculated is 5.9%. Therefore, the equities are overvalued. Equities are overvalued. Equities are overvalued. Then, the other part of the question, determine the Yardeni's model estimate of the fair value earnings yield assuming D is 0.1. Assuming D is 0.1, then the question is, what is the earnings yield and are the equities overvalued or undervalued? This was part A. Part A, the second bit of this question is where D is 0.1. What will be the earnings yield? E1 over P naught. This will be equal to YB minus D times L tag times L tag. YB remains, candidates, 0.0649, 0.0649. D changes to 0.1, 0.1. L tag will remain 0.1195, 0.1195. What will the new earnings? The new earnings yield will be 0.0649 minus 0.1 times 0.1195. This is equal to 0.0529. When converted into percentage, this will be equal to 5.3%. 5.3%. The question is, are these equities overvalued or undervalued? We know that the S&P 500, earnings yield is 5.5%. So 5.5% is greater than the Yardeni's earnings yield of 5.3%. So you can see, candidates, 5% is greater than 5.3%. Therefore, the equities are undervalued. These equities are undervalued because from the market, the value is 5.5, but when calculated using Yardeni's model, the equities are valued at 5.3%. Therefore, the equities are undervalued. The equities are undervalued. And candidates, that effectively brings this lesson to a close. where we've discussed two equity market equilibrium models. That is the Tobin's Q model. We've also done the Adeni model. In our previous lesson, we covered the Greenwald-Kroner model. Thank you for attending our sessions. If you have any question, please feel free to send it. Below this video, there is a comment section where you can post your questions, and all your questions will be answered. God bless you. See you.